The spring rain had been falling for hours, steady and soft, soaking the grounds around Carrington Manor, a place that had belonged to my family for 5 full generations. I was parked in my father's old study, the scent of aged wood and leather thick in the air, quietly watching the raindrops snake their way down the paneled glass. Meanwhile, my brothers, Ethan and Lucas, were in full swing, locked in their usual back and forth over who'd walk away with what from the family estate. That lake house in Lake Placid? That's obviously mine, Ethan announced, raking his fingers through his perfectly styled hair like he was prepping for a photo shoot. At 38, he was the oldest, and he'd always acted like the whole inheritance was already his by default. Lucas, 3 years younger and never one to hold back, let out a dry laugh. You barely show your face there. I'm there every season with my family. It makes more sense for me to have it. I didn't say a word. Just kept tracing the cracked seams in Dad's favorite leather chair with the tip of my finger. At 29, I was the youngest, and, according to my brothers, the least deserving. Natalie Carrington. The daughter who picked business school instead of following the expected path into law or medicine. The one who left town to figure herself out instead of staying put to climb the ladder in the family business. If only they had any idea. Ethan turned to me with a grin that could curdle milk. You can take the Sonoma bungalow. Real cozy. Suit your lifestyle. That little bungalow was charming, sure, but it was the smallest of the properties and barely worth mentioning compared to the rest. I bit the inside of my cheek, holding back a laugh. My mind flashed back to a private conversation with Dad, right here, in this very room, 2 years ago. Just then, Mrs. Albright, the assistant to our longtime family lawyer, popped her head in. The video call is ready. I glanced at my watch. 3:15 in the afternoon. Like clockwork. The oversized monitor flickered to life, revealing Diana Albright, who had been our legal counsel for over 2 decades. Her salt and pepper hair was tucked neatly in place, and her expression was all business. Good afternoon, Carrington family, she began. As you know, today's meeting is about dividing your father's estate after his passing last month. They'd said he passed peacefully. The last time I saw him, just 2 weeks earlier, he gave me a wink over dinner, a silent nod to a truth only we shared. Diana went on, I believe you've all had a chance to look over the preliminary paperwork I sent last week. Ethan jumped in. Yes, I have a few questions about how the estate is being split. Diana cut him off gently but firmly. Actually, those were just procedural documents. Your father left behind some very specific instructions for how this meeting was supposed to unfold. Lucas frowned. What do you mean? The will's pretty clear, everything goes to us, right? That's true, in part, Diana said, thumbing through a folder. But before we get into any of that, we need to talk about Carrington dynamics. And there it was. I sat up a bit straighter, ready for the fireworks. What about the company? Ethan asked sharply. As the oldest, I assume I'm taking over. Diana didn't blink. Carrington Dynamics was sold 2 years ago. The air in the room seemed to stop moving. The only sound was the slow ticking of the hallway clock, each second louder than the last. Sold? Lucas repeated, his voice cracking. That's not possible. Sold to who? Novabridge, Diana replied. Then she paused for effect. And the buyer was their chief executive officer. Ethan barked out a laugh, high-pitched and shaky. Come on, that's ridiculous. I've never even heard of him. Dad would never sell the company to strangers. He didn't, I said, finally speaking. They both turned toward me like I'd slapped them. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick file, and set it gently on the desk in front of me. Novabridge was created 5 years ago, I said, my voice steady. It's a private firm that focuses on restructuring businesses and managing long-term investments. I started it. I am the chief executive officer. Their faces said everything. Ethan went pale, and Lucas looked like he'd just been hit with a brick. But, you said you were traveling. Starting something small, Lucas stammered. I was. And that something small was this. Dad believed in the idea and was my first investor. Ethan reached for the folder with shaking hands, flipping through every page. Contracts, sale papers, board meeting records, all legit, signed and notarized. This can't be real, he muttered. This is some kind of joke. There's no way. Diana stepped in. Natalie spent 2 full years earning your father's trust. She brought him a plan to modernize the company and take it into new markets. While you two were busy fighting over office space, she was learning how to actually run the operation. I thought back to all those late nights, spreadsheets, strategy meetings, long talks about risk and growth. He had seen it in me. The same spark, the same drive. He knew I was not just wandering, I was preparing. All assets tied to the company, Diana continued, including the properties, business divisions, and investments, were officially transferred to Nova Bridge. Your father held on as a non-voting chairman until he passed, but Natalie has been leading things for the past years. Lucas sank into a nearby chair, his whole body slumped. But what about the manor? The houses? The land? I opened my laptop and pulled up the relevant files. Everything you just mentioned was owned by Carrington Dynamics. Which means it's all hers, Ethan finished, the words barely leaving his lips. Belongs to Nova Bridge, I corrected him. Dad and I restructured everything. It made more sense for taxes. Outside, the clouds finally started to part, and weak sunlight spilled through the windows. Somewhere else in the house, I was sure the housekeeper was going about her usual afternoon routine, probably laying out the tea tray like she'd done every single day for the last 25 years. But in that study, everything had shifted. The world didn't feel steady anymore, it had tilted. Why? Lucas finally asked, his voice thin. Why keep it all a secret? Why not just tell us? I met his eyes and didn't flinch. Would you have actually gone along with it? Working under your little sister? Taking orders from the one you both always called the family flake? Ethan shoved his chair back so fast it screeched across the wooden floor. This isn't the end, he said, voice tight. We'll challenge the will. Actually, Diana jumped in before he could go further, we should go over the terms now. Your father left behind some rather unconventional conditions for your future roles in the business. I leaned back, watching their faces like someone watching a play unfold. They had no clue that this was just the setup. The real twist was still coming, and I had the best seat in the house. The room's security cameras were tucked away in the corners, quietly recording everything. Dad had insisted on them years ago, he said it was for the family archives, said it with that usual spark in his eye. I reached down and let my fingers graze the armrest of his old chair. It made me feel close to him again. Go ahead, Diana, I said evenly. Let's walk them through phase 2. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at my brothers through the screen. Phase 2 involves a rather creative setup for your continued participation in the business. Ethan was still on his feet, his expensive suit now creased and rumpled from all his pacing. We don't need any kind of setup, he said. This company is our birthright. Not anymore, I said, pulling up a file on my laptop. You both gave up those rights 2 years ago. Lucas leaned in. That's impossible. We never signed anything like that. I turned the laptop around so they could see for themselves. You remember those quarterly reports Dad had you sign? The ones you didn't even skim because you thought it was just paperwork? Page 45, in every one of them, gradually transferred your voting rights and shares over to Nova Bridge. The color drained from their faces as it sunk in. They used to roll their eyes at Dad's traditions, thought signing those documents was just his way of making them feel included. They never once considered what they were actually agreeing to. That's fraud, Ethan said, sounding like he was grasping at anything. Diana was calm as ever. Everything was disclosed, signatures were witnessed and notarized. Not reading the fine print doesn't make it fraud. I remembered Dad's words when we put this plan together, your brothers think business is all power suits and boardrooms. Let's see if they've learned to read. Diana continued, now, your father didn't want to cut you off completely. He believed in second chances, if certain terms were met. She lifted a thick envelope from her desk. This outlines what he called phase 2 of the succession. You both have a shot to earn back a position, and ownership, in the company. Lucas squinted, suspicious. What kind of terms? I got up and walked to the window, watching the gardeners shape the hedges into clean, symmetrical rows. It was a job that required patience, precision, and a willingness to get your hands dirty. Traits my brothers had never valued. You'll be starting from the ground up, I said, turning back to them. Lucas, you'll be in accounts receivable. That finance degree of yours might finally get some use. Ethan, you'll join the compliance team. Your law background should help. Right then, the grandfather clock struck 5. A deep, resonant chime filled the room. This is insane, Lucas muttered. You can't just do this. I already did, I replied softly. But unlike you two, I'm offering a path forward. You have 1 year. Work your way up, learn the business, show you're serious, and you can earn your place back. And if we say no? Ethan asked, his voice tight. I shrugged. Then you'll still get your trust funds, but not until you turn 60. Until then, you'll receive a modest allowance. Enough to keep a roof over your heads and food on the table, but forget yachts and designer clothes. The cameras caught every bit of Ethan's face turning red. I remembered him bragging about his new yacht last month. Probably paid for it with borrowed money, banking on an inheritance to bail him out. There's more, Diana added, her voice steady. Your father left behind personal letters for both of you. Natalie? I opened Dad's desk drawer and took out 2 envelopes, carefully sealed. My brothers took them with shaky hands. As they read, I watched the expressions on their faces shift, confusion, shame, maybe even regret. Dad had written to me the day after he passed. His letter was full of love, confidence, and that quiet wisdom he always carried. Lucas finished reading first. He sank back in his chair, silent. Ethan crushed his letter in his fist, then uncrumpled it slowly, unsure if he should keep it or tear it apart. Dad knew, Lucas said after a long pause. About the insider trading. I nodded. And the money missing from the bank's accounts. We have everything documented. Ethan's head snapped up. You're blackmailing us. No, I said simply. I'm giving you protection. Accept the jobs. Show up. Learn how this business really works. And those incidents? They stay buried. Say no, and I lifted a shoulder. Novabridge has a zero-tolerance stance on financial misconduct. You know the rest. The room fell into a heavy silence. Only the sound of hedge clippers outside broke through. Lucas was the first to speak, voice low. How long? How long have you been planning this? I sank deeper into Dad's chair, fingers brushing the worn leather. Remember when I left 5 years ago? You said I was escaping responsibility. But I was preparing. Princeton business. Internships. Late nights building Novabridge from the ground up. While you were cruising on the Carrington name, I finished for him. Using it like a VIP pass. Cutting corners. Breaking laws when it suited you. Diana cleared her throat. Your contracts are ready. You have 48 hours to sign. After that, certain regulators will receive some very detailed disclosures. Lucas frowned. And if we do this, if we commit? I pulled up a final document on my laptop. Then after 1 year, each of you earns back 15% equity. I'll maintain controlling interest, but your shares come with real voting rights. Earned. Not inherited. Ethan looked down. Why go this far? Why not just cut us out? Because Dad didn't believe in revenge, I said. He believed in legacy. Not just assets or reputation, but values and discipline. He didn't want us to have the Carrington name. He wanted us to deserve it. I stood, collecting my bag. You've got 2 days. Contracts are with Diana. I suggest you actually read them this time. I reached the doorway before Lucas called after me. Where are you going? To work, I said. Some of us earn our paycheck. I paused. Oh, and Ethan? Might want to cancel the yacht. You're gonna need a place to live. Their faces were still stunned as I stepped outside. Sunlight spilled across the garden, the damp leaves sparkling. I took out my phone and dialed. Miss Carrington, came my assistant's voice. How did it go? Exactly like Dad expected, I said. Get HR ready. We'll probably be onboarding 2 very nervous new hires tomorrow morning. And if they back out? I smiled, thinking of the documents locked away in Dad's old safe. They won't. The game wasn't over. In fact, it had barely begun. And I held every single card. The next morning Carrington Dynamics' sleek glass tower was humming with a kind of curiosity that only fresh gossip could generate. Word had gotten out, the Carrington brothers were starting from the bottom. I stood at my office window, watching Ethan's flashy car pull into the parking garage, followed by Lucas's more practical sedan. They'd come. They've arrived, my assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. HR is ready for orientation. Send them to me first, I said. Minutes later, the elevator doors opened and my brothers stepped inside, looking completely out of place and business casual. Ethan had the look of a man who hadn't slept. Lucas's usual swagger had vanished. Sit, I told them, motioning toward the chairs in front of my desk. Behind me, the Philly skyline glittered through the windows, a silent reminder of what they'd almost lost, and what they still had to earn. Before you head to orientation, I said, there's something else. I walked to the wall and pressed a hidden button. A panel slid open, revealing a safe that looked exactly like Dad's back at the manor. Lucas frowned. That's from his study. A replica, I said, entering the code. The original is still there. But Dad's personal materials? We moved those here last week. Inside was a single USB drive and 1 envelope. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The wall monitor lit up. And there Dad was. He looked calm and strong. Just like the last week of his life. If you're watching this, he said, then everything has gone according to plan. Ethan shifted in his seat. Lucas leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. Natalie, Dad continued, has exceeded every expectation I had. But this was never just about her. This was about us. About saving what matters most, our family. The video panned briefly to show Dad's desk, covered in documents. Ethan. Lucas. I know. About the insider trading. The misappropriated funds. My brothers flinched. There's more she may not even know yet, he added, his voice heavy. But I remember other things too, Dad went on. Lucas, baking cookies for the whole class because your teacher said someone was having a bad day. Ethan, hiding in the garage with the injured bird you found, nursing it back to health with a dropper and a shoebox. He stared out from the screen, eyes fierce but kind. That's why I backed Natalie's plan. Not just to protect the company, but to protect you. From yourselves. Lucas turned to me, stunned. Your plan? I nodded. It was. Dad helped shape it, but the blueprint was mine. On screen, Dad held up a familiar document. This, Dad's voice echoed from the screen, holding up a thick document, is the true inheritance. He looked directly into the camera. Natalie doesn't just run the company. She holds your futures in her hands. He paused, then softened. But not as punishment, as opportunity. Your sister understands something both of you lost sight of. Real wealth isn't counted in stocks or square footage. It's measured in trust, relationships, and the legacy we leave behind. Ethan wiped his eyes quickly. Lucas stared at his lap. Dad continued, voice steady, almost warm. There's one final piece. I opened the envelope from the safe and unfolded its contents carefully. Family dinner, I said. Every Saturday. Mandatory. No business talk allowed. Dad nodded from the screen. Because before your executives, your family. And this is how you start to remember that. Natalie will lead the company, yes. But she still needs her brothers, not as subordinates, but as siblings. The screen faded to black. Silence settled over the room again, broken only by the soft hum of the building and the faint city traffic beyond the glass. I reached for one last folder. There's more, I said. Their heads lifted slightly. If you each complete 1 full year of real effort in your roles, you'll receive 10% of company shares. Lucas raised an eyebrow. I thought it was 15. It is. The final 5% will be held in trust, for your future children. He blinked. Our, what? Your future children, I repeated. Dad believed in legacy, remember? He planned for the long game. Ethan stood and walked to the window, his reflection faint against the morning sky. This was never about taking us down, he said, voice low. No, I replied, joining him. It was about saving you. Saving us? Lucas joined us, guilt still flickering in his eyes. We were awful to you, Lizzie. 4 years. I nodded. You were. But you're still my brothers. And Dad believed people can change. Ethan turned to me. Do you believe that too? I looked out over the city, alive with ambition and movement. I chose my words carefully. I believe this company needs more than just me. It needs your legal brain, Ethan, used ethically this time. And your financial skill, Lucas, put to work for real growth, not personal indulgence. But before any of that, I glanced back at them. We rebuild trust. Starting with pizza. Lucas looked surprised. Where? My place, I said, grinning. I make a killer lasagna. Plus, I have graduation pictures from Princeton you never showed up for, and an entire folder of childhood disasters Dad apparently saved for blackmail purposes. Ethan laughed. A real laugh, not the usual sarcastic snort. You're gonna hold that over us forever, aren't you? Of course I am, I said. I'm a Carrington. The months that followed weren't smooth. Ethan had a hard time taking direction from junior staff. Lucas had to relearn accounting basics he'd skipped over years ago. But slowly, things shifted. Saturday dinners became more than a formality. Between forkfuls of pasta and nostalgic arguments, we started to find our rhythm again, not as rivals or co-workers, but as family. 5 months in, I called them both to my office. They walked in cautiously, but not timidly this time. The board's impressed, I told them. Especially the ethics committee. Wait, Lucas asked, is this about the shares? It hasn't been a year yet. Nope, I said, smiling. They looked at me curiously. What if, I began, we launched something together? Outside of Carrington Global. A side venture. Something we build from the ground up, as equals. Their eyes lit up. We spent the next few hours debating, brainstorming, joking. It felt right. Exactly 1 year after that first confrontation in the manor, we returned to Dad's old study. The same security cameras were there, silent observers to how far we'd come. I want to show you something, I said, queuing up the footage from that first day. We watched in silence. 3 strangers, barely hiding their resentment and fear. I didn't even recognize that version of me, tense, armored, ready for war. We were idiots, Lucas said. Were? Ethan teased, earning a shove. I looked at them, really looked. Ethan's smugness had faded into something more sincere. Lucas's eyes had that kindness I hadn't seen since we were kids. And I was leading. With people I trusted. Dad would be proud, I said quietly. Of all of us. The cameras were still rolling. But we didn't need the footage anymore. We knew who we were now. We were Carringtons, not just in title or shares, but in heart. And that, as Dad had always known, was the real inheritance.